it provides me an opportunity, which I like to use whenever possible, to discuss the role of play and the role of sport in the development of personal computers and in forming the definition of personal computer. That was whoops. Oh, I see that the lines of the slide have all collapsed into one line. Oh well. Um, the when we were holding potluck dinners at the Community Computer Center in 1973 and 74, and I think Liza was probably there then, or certainly was a part of the group. Um, the topic was, what would a personal computer be, and how to get there. The how took a secondary importance to the question of definition. It was a rather undirected discussion, of course, being simply a series of dinners. And the question has been before us, certainly it was for the next few years, as the hardware began to arrive. And I don't recall anybody talking about users writing programs. I think we all were aware of Alan Kay's dictum that a computer, and I would say personal computer in this case, was first, second, and thirdly a communication device, but then not simply a telephone, obviously. And so we were trying to find out what sort of communication device this would be. I came to the problem of personal computers because I was involved with the first social media experiment, Community Memory, which opened up as a public access set of terminals in 1973. The first terminal was August 8th, 1973. And I like to say that we opened the door to cyberspace and discovered that it was hospitable territory. Pardon me. So the genesis of this, pardon me, went back to the free speech movement of 1964 in Berkeley. This was, to refresh anybody who is not familiar with that particular piece of history, really the outbreak of the counterculture. And it was a result of the civil rights movement, the civil rights struggle in the North, and the Freedom Summer in the South, where students had to face great danger and learned a great deal firsthand about the actual racist structure of society. Then returned to campus that fall with resolve to carry on the struggle locally, and ran into organizational or institutional resistance from the university. There it is. And the university attempted to prevent students from organizing and supporting local civil rights activity, and there was an explosion. There was civil disobedience, and it went on for 2 months. That is to say, the struggle went on, not the civil disobedience. That was episodic. And the upshot of it was that a student community formed around this issue, and the community was sufficiently mobilized so that they were able to prevail. There was a final sit-in in December, in which approximately 800 students were arrested. I was one of them. And the faculty senate voted for our position, which was really the position of applying the Constitution of the United States on this public university campus and doing away with the order of in loco parentis, in which the university ran the lives of the students as if they were parents of the students. At that time, the age of majority was 21, and most students were under that age, most undergraduates. Okay, so we had this political struggle, and we won, but it is my observation that revolutions have three characteristics. First, they're mass participation or situations. Secondly, they are overthrowing an existing order. And third, and most importantly, they have consequences far beyond what anyone anticipated. The consequences of the free speech movement were numerous. Perhaps the most important was that thousands, by my estimate, of students left the university and established the Haight-Ashbury community in San Francisco. That's why I say this was the outbreak of the counterculture. On campus, those who remained, who were many, had a completely different set of experiences and ways of looking at things. One of our intellectuals at the time, Marvin Garson, analyzed what had happened in the free speech movement struggle, and to say that the barriers to communications among people went down during this time, and strangers could communicate with each other without violating propriety. And this, I felt, was true. I had observed it. And I had also observed some of the mechanisms. I was able to spend time at the headquarters of the free speech movement and saw how it worked. And I saw especially the phone room, where there were two telephones and a table. But on the wall was a huge collection of pieces of paper with various things written on them, mostly, well, I don't know, I could say mostly, but a lot of them were questions from people. Another set were resources that people had offered, and whatever else the people in the phone room wanted to remember. So they put it up all on the wall. And they were connecting people together. And that, to me, was the genesis of the internet, really. And this worked very well. The free speech movement had no strict organizational structure. It did have a group of people who were sent and elected by various living groups and various groups of students. They called it the executive committee, although I think it had no executive responsibilities. And it served as a communication medium in its own right. People would go back to their organizations, go back to their living groups, and inform their constituents about what was being discussed, what was happening in the day's events, and they would get feedback from them. So the free speech movement was a communication structure. I was a sophomore engineering student with some small level of electronic skills, and I wanted to see how I could assist, how I could apply my technological skills, which were the only real skills I had. And so I kept looking at things from this standpoint. Now, I won't go into a lot of details, but at one point in this process, I ran into an absurdity in my own set of assumptions. I had assumed that all of these very intelligent people that I was hanging around would at one point come up with something for me to do that would be helpful. When this happened, the result was absurd. What they wanted was completely impossible to do. For me to create a police radio receiver out of thin air. And so I realized at that moment that I was taking the wrong approach of waiting for people to tell me what to do, and I had to go find what to do well in advance of it being needed. So that was the beginning of my exploration process, which wound up with me coming to the potluck dinners after I had helped establish the community memory system. A community memory, in a very real way, was the implementation of that phone room from the free speech movement inside a computer. And it was a mainframe SDS 940 system. It happened to be the same set of hardware that had previously served Doug Engelbart at Stanford Research Institute. And I was the lucky person who had to maintain it without being trained. Well, we set up our first terminal and discovered that people were extremely enthusiastic about using it, especially when they could see that there was no operator between them and the computer. And obviously the technical problem that we faced was how to provide terminals in public spaces that were usable and which were survivable, because we did have problems with that. That is to say, not from vandalism, but just from breakdown and necessary maintenance. In a serendipitous event, my father, who was the family New Ager, called me up and told me about a book by Ivan Illich, whom I'd never heard of. The book was Tools for Conviviality. It's really a very small essay, and it talked about how people in Central America were able to learn how to maintain radios when the radio technology arrived, not by going to school, but by experimenting with the equipment. And this was very resonant with my own experience of learning electronics. That's how I learned electronics. So that put the idea in my head of applying conviviality, which is the term that Illich used, as I say, tools for conviviality. And it meant that I had to discover how to apply this dimension to computer terminal design. I came up with a concept that as I expressed it, in order to survive in a public access environment, computer technology must grow a computer club around itself, which obviously raises the question of design criteria such that this would be possible. And I knew that at the same time, almost as in September of 1973, an article had been published in it wasn't a computer magazine, in an electronic hobby magazine, really one that was directed towards service technicians for radio and television. This article was called the TV Typewriter, and it raised a great deal of interest. It showed a pair of hands, a keyboard, and a television screen. And the hands were poised over the keyboard, and the screen showed the letters reading out the type text onto your television screen. It was a article of a build-it-yourself article. However, the next slide is blank. Sorry. The plans were too big to publish, and so they described it, and they said, send an envelope, a self-addressed envelope, and $2, and we will send you the plans. And I learned later that the typical response for this would be about 20 responses. They got 10,000 responses. And so very clearly something was happening. I found myself phoning up the author of the article after I had looked it over and looked over the plans and discovered that it would not serve as a terminal. So I asked him about that, and he said it wasn't intended to be a computer terminal. And he gave me an idea for the next one he wanted to do. I've always found it useful to find out from engineers, how would you do it if you had been allowed to do it the right way? I applied this idea, the idea of making the terminal central about memory. Now here I must explain what am I talking about as a terminal, as different from a computer, because today we use our computers as terminals. In fact, to a great extent. Of course, in the mainframe era, the computer was huge and expensive, and they could only interact with the outside world through devices that we call terminals, which at the initial point were teleprinters, basically electric typewriters operated remotely. And so these were the teletypes. The Model 33s were popular. They cost only about $1,500 in 1973. And I suppose you can multiply that number by approximately 8 to get today's dollars. And they were a mechanical device, and they were prone to failure and jamming and so forth. Pardon me. But also there were the cathode ray tube terminals coming in, the CRT terminals, which are sometimes called glass teletypes. The TV typewriter was such a cathode ray tube terminal, using your TV as a cathode ray tube. So I began figuring out what to do here such that it would be sufficiently convivial to attract a computer club. What that turned into was taking the memory of a future computer, and at that point the microprocessors were quite expensive, and I was very doubtful that they would catch on. So I designed a terminal around the memory. I had one circuit board that would put data into the memory, and another one that would pull it out and put it on the screen. But the structure was there so that you could grow this by plugging in additional boards and interconnecting. There was a set of rules for information exchange. I wrote up a engineering specification for these rules and for the operation of the terminal, and I published it myself, and I sold it within this small community of enthusiasts for 25 cents. It was called the Tom Swift Terminal, or a convivial cybernetic device. And Tom Swift, I have to explain, is an American cultural icon who at the time was reasonably familiar to adolescent males. It was basically a set of boys' books around a character of an adolescent equivalent to Thomas Edison, who kept inventing things in order to advance the story. And in my introduction to the Tom Swift Terminal, I said that in honor of the folk hero who would most likely be found tampering with the equipment, I'm naming this the Tom Swift Terminal. That is where the name comes from, and that's what may help in explaining it. So I wanted to develop and did do a theoretical design of a device which would encourage such Tom Swifts to get involved and to make modifications and so forth. And what this was doing really was to design into the equipment the dimension of play. Now, Bob Albrecht of People's Computer Company was well ahead of me in this regard in terms of understanding the importance of play and the importance of kids as people who work through play. When he set up People's Computer Company, the explicit, I believe, intention was to facilitate the involvement of elementary school students or students of kids of elementary school age in utilizing computers and playing games on them and so forth. A lot of people in the industry who had heard of this just felt that this was very strange behavior and it was somehow suspicious or suspect. But Bob proceeded regardless. He had his own experience of bringing children into the exhibit at a computer trade show to show that the computer was simple enough for kids to operate it, as long as it had someone like Bob to explain it to them. And he got his contract terminated because of this. And so I owe a lot to Bob Albrecht in this regard. But the entire industry was beset by would-be academics and very self-important people who described themselves as computer professionals. And it was very important to them that they be recognized as professionals and not mere technicians. And here then came this wild man, Bob Albrecht, and then this TV typewriter, and the tide began to rise of people not in the top stratum of computer technical society, but down lower, who wanted very badly to get their hands on computers and really couldn't say exactly why. I think the reason is that they wanted to play with them. We have to recognize that play is, well, of course, it's what kids do, but it's also what adults do. And adults often call it sport. I certainly, as a technical wunderkind at the time, or attempted wunderkind, felt that I was far above the physical aspect of sports, but I have since come to realize I was engaging in sport. People do this organically. It doesn't have to be imposed on them. And so I try to involve people through providing some design that would engage this sport instinct and encourage people to come together in applying this. So this became, well, the architecture that I had worked out of making memory central. Oh no! All right, pardon me. I just got a disturbing message there. The principle I had established of making memory central and making the terminal, a window on memory, meant that the computer, the terminal merged with the computer, and the speed of interaction greatly increased, because one did not have to describe the image to be displayed, transmit it over a slow communication line, and wait for it to be displayed. One could simply have the program write to an area of memory, and it, like magic, displayed on the screen. So when we built the first video display adapter using this approach, it made computer games possible, that is to say, interactive computer games. Prior to that, the interaction in computer games was through teleprinters. And at 10 characters per second, it was very slow, obviously, and you could only do a small amount. In the Trek 73 game, the map of the space in which the Enterprise existed was a small 3x3 matrix, and it would laboriously be printed out, and then you would look and see who was in your neighboring space sectors and issue commands from that. The Trek 80 game, written by Steve Dompier with for the S100 computers using the video display module, had a matrix of 8x8 cells, which was alive with dynamic activity, with funny little characters moving around and so forth. And then there were ranks and ranks of information readouts and controls and so forth. There was something that only a preteen could handle. So I will claim, and this is not generally accepted, but it's not generally opposed, that the architecture of the personal computer is fundamentally this architecture of window on memory, and memory is central to the computer. And this devolves from the need to engage people around the computer in playful activity and to come together in using that. So Ivan Illich is probably best known for a book he wrote in 1970 called Deschooling Society. And in this book, which is quite a radical volume, I mean, Illich is a Catholic philosopher who had left the Jesuits, and he postulates that the institutional structures of education are not needed. I don't go this far. And he says that we would be able to teach each other everything we need to know, provided we make this connection. Now, Illich longed for the 13th century in Europe, and felt that if we could revert to towns like that would provide the environment for this what he called learning exchange. Now, in community memory, we had a bulletin board, basically, but fortunately it was an open structure from the standpoint of the categorization of information. You could attach any number of words to your information item as indexes, limited only by your imagination. We who put it up, Resource One in San Francisco, although we considered ourselves part of the counterculture, and this was intended for the counterculture, had a very limited set of expectations for it: jobs, housing, cars. Fortunately, our users were far more creative than we were. And very soon, well, we seeded the system with some questions. One of which was, where can one find bagels in the Bay Area? Now, a bagel is a piece of bread that is from the Jewish culture, and it is a toroidal ring of bread, rather like a donut, but it's not sweet. And bagels were available in the communities with a high Jewish percentage in the East Coast, which is where I came from, but they hadn't really made it out to the West Coast of the US. So it was a valid question. And a few answers turned up, one of which was, well, most of which were listing stores where bagels could be bought. But the important question or important response was, if you call the following phone number and ask for the following name, if an ex-bagel maker will teach you how to make bagels. And this was a spontaneous learning exchange item, validating, in a certain sense, Illich's concept. So in that microcosmic sense, we opened the door also to direct person-to-person education. And we didn't have to come up with the idea. The people we served, our community, did. So at this point, I can make all kinds of diversions and digressions, but I would like to have some interaction with the audience as far as finding out what people want to hear about.
Thank you so much, Lee. That was exciting. I would now move on, as we will, with the next two speakers, a respondent. And unfortunately, we didn't make it yet to introduce you to him, Lee. Jeremy Grossman, a friend and colleague from University of Namur, will be your respondent. And he is, I think I can reintroduce him once more, a graduate student at the intersection of the philosophy of technology and the computer sciences. He will now play the role of some sort of discussant or raise questions that you can then react to. And after that, I would ask the audience in the room here and then in the chat room to also raise questions. Of course, you can also do that during the discussion. And so, since we should take some time, I think let's do this for 20 or 25 minutes and see if we find a good ending then.
Hello, Lee. Thanks a lot for your very interesting talk. I will restrict myself to one question so other people can ask their questions. And I have to say I'm particularly interested in how your political concerns are meeting your actual practices of engineer and designer of computers. So that would be the angle of my questions. Two things particularly struck my mind in your talk. The first is the change you mentioned, where you decided that technical issues shouldn't be left only to non-technical people, and at first you were not willing to engage decision making, as you phrased it, I think. And after the radio episode, you decided to engage design, to bring your own ideas. And so the first separation between decision making and technical sphere, you were putting it in questions, and that's what's particularly interesting. So if I understood correctly what you said, I see at least three levels in which computers are personal in your experience of engineering. The first one is striking that as soon as you start talking about personal computer, the first thing you mention is interpersonal relations, and so the possibility of building a network, a distributed network, not geographical, and accessible to different people. So that would be maybe the first level of personal computer, has to be interpersonal. The second level for me was when you brought up conviviality and drawing on Illich concept as a way, I had the impression, for you as an engineer to tackle technical issue in non-technical way, making kind of engaged choices. I'll let you discuss that right after. And then the definition of personal computer you explicitly gave as a window, the screen as a window on the computer itself. And then my question would be how this idea of conviviality and this narrative drawing a lot on political engagement and situated engagement actually meets concretely the activity of designing computers. You gave, I think, two answers I'm searching for. One is it helped to develop direct person-to-person interaction in the education sphere, one of the projects you led. Another is increased playful activity. That would be another possibility to interpret very concretely the conviviality you succeed to brought in designing computer. But then I would say, can we push it a bit further? And how can you consider other aspects of conviviality that would be somehow more politically situated than playful activity and direct education, and how you more generally conceive as an engineer the relation between technology, decision making, and how you frame it yourself in your practice? That would be my main question.
The idea for community memory, I will take a certain amount of credit for, because I had spent, after that episode with the police radio, I had to go out and explore. And so I went through my experience in Berkeley and the underground press, exploring and trying to find the medium that would work for the facilitation and furtherance of community development. Now, I should say that I had some experience really as a child in community development process, because my parents had assisted in the formation of an interracial community organization, a representative organization in Philadelphia. And although I was approaching it with pretty unsophisticated politics as a child, still I could see the involvement of people of all races in this structure as they attempted to gain some control over their environment in an urban environment, and prevent the degradation of their community. So I came to university with this as part of my experience and also as a participant at a very low level in the Northern Civil Rights Movement. I was picketing, the Woolworth stores when the sit-ins were happening in Woolworths in lunch counters in the South. Berkeley, of course, was a relatively sophisticated political environment in the sort of countercultural dimension, certainly in the radical dimension. Although in 1963, when I arrived, that was only a few hundred people. And so I felt comfortable in that environment. But of course, I was an odd character. I was the technical guy. And when we formed the ad hoc organization of the moment, I would always volunteer for the office committee. And I would usually work with the mailing lists. And I could see that there was a community out there who turned up on all of the mailing lists as we went through them serially. And that there was a continuity, a generational continuity. These were the radicals of the 1930s and 40s. And they were our elders, although we didn't admit that we had elders. But there was this dimension of continuity, and they were providing support and working in the office with the mailing lists. That was an important aspect. So I began to think about making these mailing lists more accessible and fluid, so that you could change what your listing was. And that idea of the directory that was alive and changing as one changed oneself, as I was experiencing my own growth, became very important to me. I noticed that the act of handing out leaflets, which in 1964, during our free speech movement struggle, was actually against university regulations, although nobody ever got in trouble for it. But the fact that someone was standing there who was willing to break the rules by passing out leaflets very often led to conversations, and everybody was a stranger at Berkeley. So you could see people meeting each other and developing links. I went in search of technical aspects of media which would maximize the opportunities for people meeting each other and people continuing these contacts as they changed their interests. And eventually I went through a process of writing for the Berkeley Barb and their breakaway underground press, and came to the conclusion that the print medium was fatally flawed in this regard because it was centralized. So I was trying to figure out what a decentralized media. I knew the telephone system was and the postal system was, and so I had to think about what could be used to facilitate them. And at one point, I attempted to set up called the Berkeley Network Bulletin, which was a little bulletin board printed on my mimeograph machine and was to be carried around and distributed to intentional communities, to households, to communes, and so forth in the San Francisco area. I never got past the first edition of that because of personal reasons. I was in depression and couldn't really carry out any projects. But I was heading in that direction, and I noticed that the switchboards were more in line with what I had experienced at the phone room. Now, these were those telephones and the prototypical internet that I described were replicated and set up around particular interest areas. We had a directory of switchboards that we printed in the Berkeley Barb every week. And I went around to them and tried to find out why they were doing what they're doing, how they were doing it, whether there was any technology they could use. Now, it turns out I was not the only person. There was a group of people that had left the university in 1970 on the occasion of the Cambodia invasion. And they decided that they had to bring computer power to the counterculture. They formed Resource One. I discovered them because by 1970, I had reached the conclusion that networks of computers, and in this case, they were mainframe computers, that I had just encountered in learning some computer programming, these networks would eliminate the issue of location and would allow for communities of interest that were flexible and fluid to develop. There was very, very crude indexing methods for posting notices on these systems. I had no idea where I would get a computer, and then turns out that Resource One had actually secured the donation of a very powerful time-sharing computer. So I joined them and brought to them the idea of the bulletin board. Ephraim Lipkin, who is someone I brought into Resource One, was the systems programmer, and he brought in a number of other people. There was participation from people who had participated in Buckminster Fuller's World Game at the time. So there was a kind of technological, countercultural axis at that point that I was exploring. So now here I may have drifted from the question, and you're going to have to bring me back if need be. But
yeah, I think you've in great part answered. The question was, how do you conceive the interaction between your political engagement and your activity as an engineer? And I think if I get correctly the answer, it would be you would situate it at the level of the control. You said control of an environment, the structure of communication, and that's what was important for you to enable a militant to have. At least that's how I understood it. But then, maybe I would say the way you bring conviviality as from Illich as technology being more or less capable of being understood, manipulated, and modified to individual ends. It doesn't seem to apply so much to the computer per se, but more to the organizational and technological system of media. And then my question would be, as an engineer, and I think it's interesting, Liza and you seem to divide strictly people with technical skill able to access to the computer, and other people who could learn but don't have to learn and don't have to relate more than that to the machine itself. And that would be maybe another possible definition of what is a personal computer if one can't establish any personal relation to its functioning itself. It stay a stranger.
I think
it's not really
the
personal.
point of the personal computer is it is transparent. And it took a lot of work to get it transparent. So that the ideal personal computer would not be seen as a computer at all. I don't know what it would be seen as, but because it would not be totally invisible. But certainly I wish that media would be as transparent as possible and as responsive to the user's even frivolous wishes as could be. And we came from a place where, you know, computers were seen as untouchable, quite literally, and where the interaction with them had to be intermediated by the computer professionals, the systems analysts, and so forth. And we did overthrow that order so that the personal computer revolution, in my view, was a real revolution. So in fact, I have a problem, and always have, with the concept, the metaphoric concept of the computer. In the past, I've said, look around you, there's more than one computer. But of course, this is the computer in the mind. This is the metaphor of the computer. And a lot of people, Liza, Bob Albrecht, me, and a very large number of people have exerted our efforts to ensure that this metaphor of the computer became something friendly, something that was connected to the user, and not something that was remote and dependent upon invisible powers. Now, obviously, people who use computers don't know all of the technology down to the physics involved. I don't even know all of that. But that's not really what I'm saying. It's a matter of the metaphor. It's a matter of how people think of what they're doing when they're using a computer. And I think we've come a very long way in this regard. Well, let me stop there and invite further discussion.
Yeah, this is moving in a very interesting direction, I think. I want to move it along a little bit, but not without including the audience here or the online audience. So if there's any questions, let's take at least 10 more minutes. I think we can delay this. Also, Howard at the end said it's okay when we have some delay. So let's see if there's any questions in the room. I saw Marcel Mars and others maybe raise their hands. And actually, I would like you to, if you don't mind, to introduce yourself so we get this more going also on the matter of getting to know the different voices in the room.
Okay, yeah. Marcel, I'm a PhD student here. I'm coming from ex-Yugoslavia, and I did a lot of work in the world of hackers, free software movement, and then an activist for for development of free software and also use of free software as a, let's say, metaphor for transforming other fields. And my question goes in a direction, so I think that what we are talking here is super important, and also in the relation to education as institutional one. And I think that from the early days, and it's still kind of here, is that it's hard to teach complex matters like computers. So it happens a lot outside of institutions. It happens a lot through spontaneous, enthusiastic, but also communal, oral in relation to written and all of these kind of things. But at the same time, technology which was built with that kind of hybrid approach allowed other transformations, and it's quite visible in Europe, where the commodification of knowledge and privatization of universities happened also thanks to the development of that technology. And what I would like to hear from you is because I think that there is one very interesting moment which happened with the open letter to hobbyists by Bill Gates. And I know that you were involved in some of that responses. And in a way, Richard Stallman later on was some kind of a take on that. So I would like to hear how do you see that moment from today, in which way it was transforming at least our imaginary, and if possible, I know that we don't have enough of time, what would be the alternative history if we didn't have that? For how long we could maintain that world of, I don't know, hybrid academic where knowledge is not commodified, which is not a product to sell and things like that. So I'm really interested to hear your take on that, and maybe just to try to bring that memory back.
Well,
that was
I could probably talk for quite a while
on
now,
that,
so I'll try to
by
be
Bill Gates.
as brief as I can. But I'm interested by what you said about alternative future with and commodification of knowledge would not have occurred under the academic regime or something. Is that what you said? Okay. I think, well,
he says yes.
generally, the project that the personal computer community embarked upon was really the decommodification of knowledge, and that when the tools for concentration of knowledge are held in a small number of hands, be they academic or political or economic, the knowledge is treated very much as a commodity. For instance, the model of the priesthood on which IBM operated depended upon the priests, as it were, and the acolytes, and there's the LLOHW letter. Everyone in that hierarchical structure not being willing to let the secrets of the temple out, in effect. And so the liturgy, the rituals, as it were made very complex. IBM's technology was very hard to learn. And of course, the physical parts of which it was made were unavailable on the open market. They were completely manufactured within IBM, and no information was made available, etc. So we were opposing a regime in which information was not available, in which you could be told that you will not be permitted to know that, or any particular fact. That was anathema to us. And we can see in Bill Gates' letter that he's very much trying to operate within that world, and that he made the mistake of chastising us on the grounds that he and Paul Allen had spent $40,000 worth of computer time in developing this. Now, it turns out somebody else paid for that computer time, as was most often the case with computer time. It was a completely artificial construct. And everyone who read that recognized this fact. But Bill Gates was attempting to say, I control this. I'm selling it as a commodity. You have violated the rules by passing this around. Send me the money. And of course, nobody sent the money, or very few people, perhaps less than 10. We laughed at this. And what was going on, however, was that we had developed our expectations of what a personal computer would be through time sharing. The community computer center had time sharing terminals, and the People's Computer Company printed listings of games that you could enter into a teletype on a time sharing system. That was the technology that came closest to personal computing at the point. And when the Altair computer was announced and a tremendous rush occurred to buy it, we discovered that we had only the bare essentials of a potential computer. And so along came Microsoft offering what to us was what we needed to have in order to have devices that acted like time-sharing systems. And saying there was now an additional paywall, and please, you give us a lot of money. Well, we found a way around that as hackers, and began passing the tape around, the effect of which was that Microsoft Basic became the hegemonic BASIC, the hegemonic program. Development of what was known as Tiny Basic, which was the foundation for Dr. Dobbs' journal, basically stopped because the market for it disappeared. So we, in effect, ensured Bill Gates' future wealth. We were not the only factor, but we made his product the standard product. And when manufacturers came to him, they had to come to him in order to get it because it was the most widely used BASIC. And when they did their investigations, they found that out. We saw this simply as getting a hold of the last component that we felt should have been with the product to begin with. And all of us had spent perhaps 10 times the amount of money we had assumed we would spend, and a vast amount of time in order to try to burrow into and learn the technological things we needed to know. So we felt we had made an investment and we wanted to get that investment paid or back. Does this help?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it helped. It helped a lot.
Thank you for those good questions. I think, yeah, I'm surprised that we move in that direction already, talking about the political implications and the technological implications so closely, and this is exactly what I was hoping for, so I'm excited. I want to now move on, so although we don't, I think, have to stick to academic routines and need to really focus on every minute, let's move on to not make this too late. So I want to query in the room here if you need a break, and I also want to know, Lee, if you can stick around, if you have time pressure or not.
There's no time pressure here. I can stick around for a little while. And may I just make a statement here that I perhaps have neglected to make to wrap up in less than 5 minutes. I just wanted to say that along the way, hello? Okay, thank you. All right.
Go ahead, Lee.
I developed the conclusion that communication was the fundamental element of community. You look at the names, they're the same word, really. And that politics involved control over the lines of communication. I mean, what happens in the process of politics? Ultimately, it's a matter of who gets to talk to who else. So that if we could change this environment of communication, if we could develop alternate paths of communication that do not go through ordinary channels, hierarchical channels especially, then we would have a potent political tool. And I think this is in the process of bearing out. Not precisely as I had expected, but that doesn't matter. At one point, prior to any networking, I had this idea that we might put the community memory system into a truck and drive around to various communities and set up as a kind of fair, so people could come and update their directory listings in effect, and also meet each other. And this developed into the idea of once we could use a network, and in this case the phone network, of local community centers, interconnected by many means, but also by the community memory system, pardon me. These would be communication nodes and places where copiers might be available, and where people would go as a sort of center of their local community. So that from a political standpoint, I knew that once it was discovered what was going on, that the political forces would move against it to try to control it. And all I could do was to work in the design area to make it as difficult as possible for anybody to control the structure upon which I hoped that community would be growing, the kind of matrix on which community develops. Okay. So that's the sort of political discussion.
Thank you, Lee, for that wrap-up and for all those insights. Let's make sure we move them along in the next discussions, and also get you to speak, even though most of the speakers are present. We should take care of that too.